Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hi, this is Henry Gilroy, co-executive producer of Star Wars Rebels. You're listening to Aggressive Negotiations.
Welcome to Aggressive Negotiations, the Star Wars podcast here on the Nerd Party Network that, well, we just like to dive into things a little bit differently. And honestly, John and I don't know where we're coming from today because, well, it's called the Unknown Regions for a reason. So, luckily, we do have this really nice Chiss navigator who's getting us through the area. But before we dive into our topic this week, we want to remind you that you can find Aggressive Negotiations, a Star Wars podcast, wherever you do find podcasts. Make sure that you subscribe there. We would really appreciate also a star rating and review wherever you listen, especially if that's on Apple Podcasts or iTunes, which is still the main place for people to get their podcasts. And those reviews really do help people find the show when they're searching for Star Wars podcasts. Because if you've ever searched for Star Wars podcasts, you know, well, there are a galaxy's full of them. So, give us that star rating review, and we will thank you on the show, and we'll read your review on the show. You can find us all over the place, too. We're on Twitter, at the Jedi Masters. That's the show account. Please do follow us there. John, I just looked today. Did you know that we are only 4 followers away from 500 followers?
Only 4? Well, geez.
Isn't that kind of crazy?
Yeah, come on. If you have not followed us yet on Twitter, and you are on that platform, please, by all means, give us a follow. We will not clog up your feed with nonsense. We only tweet the Star Wars love and fun stuff and stuff like that.
Very
true.
Yeah. We will not sully your Twitter docket with a bunch of junk.
No
Only
sullying
Star
of Twitter.
Love. No, absolutely not.
We are an anti-sullying platform.
Absolutely. I can't promise for the rest of Twitter, but at least the Jedi Masters, we will unsully your day. So you can also find the entire network at Join Nerd Party. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/The Nerd Party. And then we've got the website at thenerdparty.com where maybe you would like to send John and I an email. So you can do that by going over to thenerdparty.com/contact, choose a show, choose Aggressive Negotiations, and that email comes to John and I. So something, John, that I was thinking, which I know is a dangerous pastime.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. We were both reading Thrawn Treason, and you're not quite done with it yet, and don't worry, we're not spoiling any, Thrawn Treason. We're going to do that on the 602 Club this same week that we're dropping this show, so you can look over there for that if you want John and I's full thoughts on that. But I started to really think about this idea of like the unknown regions, because I feel like especially the Thrawn books, a lot of the stuff we got in Aftermath, there's this push towards the idea of the unknown regions and something happening out there. And so first I just wanted to ask you, what do you think of that idea of them kind of setting up where they might go in the future of Star Wars here with all of this content that's been, building the unknown regions? I mean, because this is something like we've always heard of. It's always been kind of on the Star Wars map, but it's like now they're really starting to dive into this stuff and give us even more and more tidbits about.
I think if you're going to move past the Skywalker saga, it's the smartest thing you can do, because simply the name Unknown Regions gives you a lot more leeway. We have a lot of preconceived notions about the part of the galaxy we know about. We've been through the Republic. We've been through the Empire. We're going through the First Order and stuff like that. We have some fair idea of how the galaxy works. Moving it into an area that has the name Unknown right in it, the rules are off. We can completely change everything that we've done before. The social structures can be completely different. The types of characters, and it opens up the types of aliens. One of the things that I know that fans, can sort of pick on, and I do from time to time, like, when you bring a new alien species in or a new host of alien species, it's nice to have a Rodian or two in the background because it gives it that anchor, of familiarity. If I move into the unknown regions, fair or not, that sort of subconscious expectation is completely freed up. I would be surprised to see something that I know in the unknown regions because it's unknown. And so I think that would be the smartest place for them to go in the future.
Yeah, and so there's and I was thinking about this too, just in conjunction with what's coming up with the Rise of Skywalker as well. What we've been getting in the books, the idea that Palpatine was specifically kind of worried about or having these watch posts looking at the unknown regions and kind of seeing what's coming, like fearing something coming, and maybe even the idea of him finding a place to like hide things there. So my thought process is as well is, do you start that kind of introduction there a little bit in the Rise of Skywalker where has Palpatine hidden a fleet in the unknown regions, and that's where the other part of the remnant went, the one that maybe didn't even turn into the First Order or something, and it becomes like that. In the EU, they were looking for that Imperial fleet that had gotten lost.
Outbound fleet,
all
right?
those years ago. Not just outbound flight, but there's another part of that too, and it's the part of the story that involves Callista, which wasn't great storytelling.
Oh,
but,
yes, that was which was Children of the Force, correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
So there's some kernels of good ideas there, and it could help explain, lots of interesting things. But I feel like they have really kind of set themselves up with something that could be very interesting. Now, I want to ask before we get too much into that, do you think if they set all this stuff up in these ancillary materials, though, do you think that's enough, or do we need it to be set up in something like you have part of the Rise of Skywalker have something to do with this, so people have some sort of familiarity? Because, as many people that read Star Wars books, that's not the general public that you're going to want an entire movie series to be based off, right?
Absolutely correct. No, they cannot set it up just in the books. I think that they do need to have some sort of on-screen introduction for it, some sort of taste in a work like Episode 9. I have no idea, if they're going to go too deep down that road or anything, but Episode 9, if that's going to be the next step for them to go to the unknown regions, should have a taste in it, because that's going to be the one that draws in the non-diehards. My wife will go see Episode 9. Other people I know who I could talk about Outbound Flight and Druis Sabath until I'm blue in the face, and they're going to look at me as, what are you talking about? And so that, or I could mention Thrawn. You need to bring in people that don't even watch the cartoons up to this point, and the only way you're going to be able to do that is with a work of sizable impact, like Episode 9 is guaranteed to be. Like, there's no way it can't pull it in, unless they're pivoting, because one of the big questions that's happening right now at this moment in time is whether properties are going to be able to continue relying on the non-initiated fans, if you will. Because there are going to be so many things with so much content on so many delivery vehicles. Is the Unknown Regions, is that their move to populate the streaming service, basically?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, obviously, I think, as you say that, I'm already thinking, the idea of like Marvel having like 5 new shows on the streaming service that have to do with, different facets of their universe. And, I feel like I read somewhere somebody high up in Disney and Lucasfilm just talked about this idea, though, and I could be totally wrong, but I just feel like I read this somewhere, that them saying, that Star Wars isn't Marvel, in the sense that, it works differently. And, I think that's definitely true. For the most part, Star Wars has always been a film franchise. And obviously it has done well in branching out. I mean, gosh, when you think of tie-in fiction, Star Wars literature is probably the biggest of the tie-in fiction. So, I mean, it definitely gets the most amount of fans, I think, reading it. The animated shows have done an amazing job of pulling in lots of people, I mean, especially from the fan base. But I think you are right. You really have to find a way to get other people into this. And like you said, even if you do something like Thrawn, which everybody in Star Wars fandom that's inside the fandom knows who Thrawn is, even if they haven't seen a lot of him or read a ton of him, right? Mm-hmm. But they know who he is, and so that, and they know the species that he is, and, that gives them a touchstone if you go to the unknown regions, and we know that, the Chiss exist there. So, but, again, like, your wife doesn't know that. The everyday fan, the everyday person going to the movies doesn't have that kind of inside baseball about Star Wars.
Well, and you also just made me very depressed because with how much I've talked about Thrawn and how much I love Thrawn, the idea that I haven't gotten through to someone about how great he is, that's really kind of depressing. It kind of makes me feel like is it all worth it? How all of the evangelization?
Have you been doing your job, John?
I guess not. I'm going to have to start leaving books and comics by her feet while she sleeps and hope they go in by osmosis or something. But yeah, it's like I'm excited by the idea of the unknown regions, probably more than any idea that they could have about exploring the galaxy post First Order. Like, I think that there are two areas that are really rich for exploration. Post Skywalker family, I think the unknown regions makes the most sense. But if you're in that area between Jedi and Force Awakens, I need more content there. And I want more content between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope as well. So I feel like we have these three categories, and if you're going to move out of column A and column B, column C has to be unknown regions. And, I mean, the Chiss would be a great anchor point, especially if they were able to find a way to make a Chiss character the main character, because we've already gotten a sense for their differences through the characters that we've met from there. And so for the fans especially, that's the one hook of familiarity we can have. That's our reference point for everything else that happens around it, and can create its own sort of mythic enterprise, because then we get to see what the hero's journey and it truly speaks to the whole point of view thing. What does a journey and a maturation look like for a Chiss, the way we've seen it with Luke, or the way we've seen it with Ahsoka, or the way we've seen it with Ezra or Rey or somebody like that?
Yeah, I can say my fan desire would be that, who came to the rescue in Episode 9 is Ezra, Thrawn, and Ahsoka with Sabine.
Okay.
Riding in on some Purgle, just...
I can tell you that I would probably, they would have a report of somebody exploding, literally exploding from joy. Spontaneous combustion, cause of death, happiness. That would be it.
Yeah, and the main reason for thinking that was just, regardless of how, because you haven't finished Thrawn Treason, but we know how his story ends, at least up till, the last time we saw him, which is with Ezra and them going off where, who knows where, Purgle knows where. So the idea, and what we know, too, from the series is that what Thrawn is doing with the Empire is because he actually thinks it's the best way to keep his own people safe. So and obviously Thrawn is ruthless and as much of a villain as anyone, because he's willing to do whatever it takes to win. He is kind of a, the ends justify the means type of character, which is where I think his evilness comes from. But at the same time, there is something behind him that is not necessarily just straight up evil. And so I've always kind of wondered, it'd be interesting if he was the one who kind of helped, the fledgling rebellion, resistance, whatever it's called now. So, but all that to say, just yes, I love the idea of going to the unknown regions and finally exploring and understanding, the Chiss ascendancy is such a thing from the EU, and obviously Zahn reintroducing Thrawn and the Chiss Ascendancy with the Grisk, and learning more about the Chiss Ascendancy than we ever have before now with the new Thrawn books. I would love to be able to explore that more, and who knows what got lost out there, from Republic times. I mean, you could meet all sorts of interesting characters out there.
The one thing that I think they need to be careful of, and this was the thing I think that back in the old expanded universe days started driving me away from the books, was whether my perception was correct or not. A lot of it, especially when they brought in the Yuuzhan Vong, which they were extra galactic, if I recall, not unknown regions. I don't know if they would have shifted that if the Vong had been introduced in the Clone Wars, because there was some plan to bring the Vong in at some point. I don't know if they would have maybe had them be unknown regions instead. Maybe that's easier for the audience to, hold on to. And the thing is, the idea of an extragalactic threat goes all the way back to the original Marvel Comics with the Nagai, who were the villains who came back, tied in with Lumaya, who was Shira Bree before Luke presumably killed her, I think around issue 64. And I've gone down a rabbit hole. But my point is that one of the things that started to irk me with some of these external threats is that it almost seemed to paint a justification in for Palpatine's machinations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it seemed to be like, well, sure, he was bad, but what was out there was worse. And I guess in the tradition of Star Wars, that's a worthwhile conversation to have, where, stick to the devil sort of thing. But at the same time, it felt like a violation of the mythic rule of the supervillain that Palpatine was, to give any sort of idea that he was in any sense justified for being the monster that he was. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think absolutely. And I always kind of, I would say, blanched at that idea as well. I didn't really love that thought that you would kind of in any way humanize Palpatine.
Mm-hmm.
I think that kind of ruins what it means to be a Sith anyway, that you had any kind of altruism to yourself.
Right.
Because that, and in many ways, that creates an altruistic reason for him turning to the dark side. And the only one who kind of sort of had that was Anakin, and yet even that is easily, he twists that into not just being about trying to save Padme, but then control more than he should have control over. So, I mean, all of that, I just totally agree. And I think, the thought, I think that the best way to do anything like that kind of story is that Palpatine was trying to just secure his power as long as possible, more than, yes, he might sense a threat out there, but so his desire then is to make sure that he is unusurped, and I think you could even see that really in the machinations of Palpatine in Thrawn Treason, just the way he's playing people off of each other under his leadership, and you see that he seems to be the one who, as much as anybody in the Empire, is actually for the Death Star. And I think that might be a thing where you truly see that Palpatine's desire is to be able to hopefully challenge anything that came into the galaxy from the unknown regions, that he could just obliterate them, with the snap of a finger, basically.
Yeah, and it's it's definitely interesting territory to get into, because we know that Star Wars is space fantasy. It's not science fiction. Never has been. And I think that another difficult line for them to walk is they will have to juggle the danger of becoming too much science fiction. There was a point, and I'll refer back to the old Expanded Universe books again, just to prove that I did in fact read them and didn't just dislike them or anything like that. I can't remember the specific names of the books, but if I recall correctly, it was the Black Fleet Crisis. It was a trilogy. It was paperbacks. And there was, a new villainous race introduced. And as part of this, it went sort of hard sci-fi, where Lando and Lobot were out in space, and it talked about how you couldn't see any of the ships because in space there was no light. And it was one of those things where it was an instant mental rejection where I said, this is Star Wars. You can see everything fine. And so like I am fully confident they'll keep it in mind, but I think it will be a constant struggle for, not struggle, that's too strong a word, but it will be something they'll have to continually have like on the board. Don't become Star Trek. And that's not a slight against Star Trek. I'm a Star Trek fan too, but I want my I want my Star Trek here, and I want my Star Wars there, and I don't want them mingling the feel of the two. That makes sense, right?
Yeah, because there's Star Wars is that space fantasy.
Yeah.
Instead of science fiction, really.
Yeah.
It is a space fantasy, and so and I would say in many ways it's a space fairy tale. That's kind of the way that Star Wars works. That's one of the things I think we all respond so well to it. And one of the things George obviously really pulled in because, fairy tales are meant to teach a moralistic lesson anyway. And much of Star Wars is in that mode. And so, and that means that you're not too worried then about the uber reality of it.
Right.
We let things slide like that. So yeah, absolutely agree with you. I think the other thing where the unknown regions can obviously become, I think, a big story point is obviously with just the animation. Like we mentioned, I think earlier, the fact that we don't know where Ezra and Thrawn went, and so the thought process of doing a story series and an animation series about Ahsoka and Sabine searching for Thrawn and Ezra, while Ezra and Thrawn have to work together to survive in the unknown regions, actually is such an interesting buddy cop show, like on both sides. Like, talk about a really great way to explore the unknown regions then. Putting Dave at the helm of that so that it would always feel legit Star Wars, because he wouldn't do anything that would make it so out of the box that it wasn't Star Wars, but he would also be doing the George thing, I think, in the Clone Wars, where you also are thinking outside of what we might think of Star Wars and bringing that into the Star Wars box.
Right. But while finding a way to adapt it, to bring it in, and, also respect that sense of whimsy. And so, and so of course everything's speculation. But if you were, I'll go ahead and ask you the odds. What odds do you give it that we wind up in the unknown regions in the next series of films, the Benioff and Weiss movies? I'll give you 4 easy choices: 25% chance, 50% chance, 75% chance, 100% chance that we wind up, or if you want, we can do 0, 50, 0, 25, 50, 75, because nothing's 100% sure.
I do think that there is a good 50% chance that, because I just can't see them spending this much time and not utilizing it in some way, shape, or form, and utilizing it. And like I think you mentioned at the very beginning, it's so true. If you're going to, unless you're going to go all the way back and do like a Knights of the Old Republic series, if you want this to have a unique feel to it, then you need to go somewhere different. And the place that we've never really truly been, except for through some of these allusions to things in these new Thrawn books. And obviously, we've got the fact that they created Black Spire Outpost, which is, Galaxy's Edge's planet there on Batuu. You've got that right next to the unknown regions. it just all seems to be adding up to that they would use all of those things more than to just sell, like, I'm reading a Crash of Fate right now. They're going to use that more to that Blackspire Outpost is going to kind of become this thing that's like the new Tatooine for whatever the new series is, and that means that branching out into the unknown region seems it's a good 50%. I mean, it could be as much as 75.
Yeah, I think I wind up with you. I don't know if I'm as strong. I don't think I could go as high as 75%. I think it's a 50-50 shot. I agree with you. They're spending all of this time developing something. And I know that so many of we fans want a Knights of the Old Republic thing to happen. But at the same time, if you are going to do something bold and new with Star Wars to move it away from the typical Jedi versus Sith fight, then unknown regions are your biggest opportunity. You've got unlimited potential and absolutely no worry about, is what I'm doing going to violate some established bit of canon or lore that is in a material that I haven't read or seen yet, and so feel restricted.
So you're saying it's Star Wars Hakuna Matata? No worries. See, well, and as you were talking, I was just thinking, like, this is also a perfect way to be able to give you things from the past that got lost in the unknown regions, So, like, why couldn't you find Jedi from thousands of years ago that help us inform what that was like? All of that kind of stuff. You could really do those kind of things because you just have a region of space that we know is difficult to get in and out of from the Thrawn books, and that the way that the Chiss and the Grisks have trouble navigating, and why you actually need Force navigators, on the Chiss ships. Say that 3 times fast.
Yeah.
And so, I think you really created an interesting idea of then maybe why you would even find Jedi there, because they would be able to, pilot in that region. So yeah, to me, it just seems like a whole new world of just like it's a big, you just know there's that bowl of candy out there and you just want to stick your hands in it and see what you pull out, So yeah, absolutely.
For sure. And I when I think of the unknown regions, I get excited because it's got a heck of a lot of potential.
At the same time, I feel like, we kind of know, I feel like, we may get some sort of animated series that helps, fill in even more maybe of, the 30 years between Jedi and Force Awakens kind of thing. We've got books coming in that era, so Unknown Regions gives you an ability to play in an era, maybe past Rise of Skywalker. But it still leaves open all the beauties of, you can go back and play in the prequel era with different things, so there's still so much you can really explore, I think, with Star Wars, which, to me is just exciting. Like, there's many ways to keep this from getting dry and boring if you do it right. So, and it'll all come down to who's involved, So, if that person truly understands the Star Wars and Star Wars storytelling, you can do a lot of things. So I think it just creates, to me, some anticipation and a slight bit of excitement to see what they'll come up with.
Well, whatever they come up with, I suspect we're going to find out sooner than we think what's going to be happening. And so I'm looking forward to those announcements a great deal.
By the way, I just have to ask you, because you're reading Thrawn Treason, do you hear Thrawn's voice every time from Rebels? It's just so great. Like,
it is.
I love reading. It's so easy to read his voice. It's like that slow, mechanical, methodical. Oh, it's great.
Well, and who better than than the guy who created him, Zahn? But what I love most of all is, of any character I've seen come to life from book to any sort of filmed thing, animation in this case, Thrawn remains one of a small handful of characters where the visualization and his voice and his mannerisms and everything, when I saw him, I said, yep, okay, that's it. Like so many, it might not have been exactly the way I had it, but then once I saw it, I was like, how could I have seen it any other way? Yeah.
It's great stuff when that happens.
Oh, yeah.
Well, if anybody else, wants to catch up with you, John, and maybe, they want to talk with you about this idea of what they think might be in the unknown regions and, what we could be exploring there, where can they find you?
Well, you can find me. My online name is Kessel Junkie. You can find me lurking on Twitter from time to time with my account there. You can find me over on KesselJunkie.com, writing usually just whimsical, tongue-in-cheek movie reviews and stuff like that. And similarly over on Letterboxd. And then you can find me right here on the network co-hosting a show called Retro Perspective with my friend Mike Schindler, where we're going through 1994 a week at a time and reviewing all of the movies that, all of the movies that we can manage to watch from that year. So where can people find you?
Well, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, and Vero under the same name, MattRushing02. I'm also here on the network doing another show called Owl Post. I do that with Dre Kaufman, and we talk about Harry Potter each and every week. We're doing one chapter at a time, and we are almost done with the Order of the Phoenix. And then you can also find me over on the Trek FM network. I do two shows. One is called The Orb with Chris Jones, as we talk about Star Trek Deep Space Nine when we can find a chance in our busy schedules across the world, as he's in Japan and I'm here in the United States, to talk about that. You can also find me doing the 602 Club. It is our general geek show. We love talking all things geeky, every franchise we can get in. But we also love, as I mentioned, we're talking Star Wars this week. So as you're listening to this episode, go check John and I talking Thrawn Treason together over there. And then last but not least, I do a show called Cinema Stories, and that's with my good friend Courtney. And we talk about films through the lens of faith. And actually, recently, we just did Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. So definitely a fun one for
an unfairly maligned movie.
Absolutely. 100% agree. So, but John, with all of that said, I think it's time for us to find our way back from the unknown regions to the temple and close these negotiations.
Master Rushing, negotiations are closed.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.